Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Casual Watch Talk Social. This is a social Sunday discussion. We're missing Sam. I'm going to be your substitute Sam again. We've got our usual suspects joining us today. We're going to have a fun conversation. We hope to engage you guys, the audience. We want to have a back and forth. We want you guys to ask us all the questions you want, and we'll try to address as many as we can. But before we get started, we're going to do our customary wristwatch check. And Mark, you're in the hot seat. What are you wearing today?
I am wearing my Omega Speedmaster Mark II racing dial. So this is the 2014 reissue. And you can see it has the lovely sort of orange hints to it. And if I can see it, the one that nobody gets is the orange rehote, which is the sort of the cherry on the cake.
Absolutely
That's
love
what I'm
it.
wearing today.
Such a great looking watch. The case is so cool on that one.
Yeah. Very, very 70s sci-fi.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a scratch magnet, but it's still a great looking watch.
That's
Just
awesome.
look at it, it scratches.
Nearest you'll get to Flight Master.
Yeah.
Dave, what are you wearing?
It wasn't popular when it came out. So it wasn't popular when it came out.
No,
Well, even to this day,
Yeah.
it's not that popular. It's kind of like the it's like the black sheep in the Speedmaster family, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a watch nerd's watch. It's not a
Guilty.
a public consumer. It's not a public popular watch.
Yeah.
Dave, what are you wearing?
Apart from sniffing because I've got the cold, I have got my Girard
Casquette.
Perregaux Casquette 2. Which
Nice.
Love it.
see if I can bend round, but there we go.
Ah, nice.
So yes, the most pointless driver's watch in the world because it's a driver's watch that will kill you. Because if you want to tell the time, you have to take your hands off the steering wheel to press the buttons. So typical Swiss fashion. It's like not thinking of repeat custom.
Wait, you're holding with the hand. The other hand you could push the button. No,
That's
because that's like if you've got a driver's watch, you're a performance driver. So it makes perfect sense to remove one hand from the steering wheel, doesn't it?
I mean, that's the classic Italian supercar ergonomics, isn't it? Totally awful.
I was thinking
Here's the first question,
about
Dave.
American driving. We just kind of at the 12.
Or like the more modern American driving, Tesla style, sitting with having a sleep whilst your car contemplates how it's going to murder you.
I'm fairly sure that there was a Lancia designer involved in the ergonomics of that watch. Otherwise,
Apparently not in the electronics though, because it still works.
Do you find
hasn't rusted yet.
Do you find that it doesn't stay illuminated for long enough, like with the bit of a Computron and a lot of LED watches?
Let me tell you how long it stays lit for. 2 seconds. So correct, not long enough.
Yeah, it's a shame that.
Yeah.
Get more battery life that way.
To be honest, this is now 2 years. 2 years or so, and the battery stayed fine. To be fair, the good thing about it, I guess, is that there's no display on when you're not pressing the button. So the battery, there's 2 batteries in it, I think. In theory, they should last a long time, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And they are actually user replaceable. So someone at Switzerland actually thought that one through.
But is it some kind of crazy funky battery, or is it a battery you get at the drugstore?
No, pretty standard watch cell batteries. So yeah, I can't remember the size of them, but they're nothing particularly unusual. So it's quite good. I think they're the same size as most of the Swatch watches. So yeah, it's all right from that side of things.
That's pretty cool. Thomas, what are you wearing today?
I'm wearing my Explorer 2 Polar. I found that this could be my one and done watch when I bought it. Absolutely love it. Really fallen for it heavily, this one. I know it's boring and it's Rolex, but yeah, love this watch. Really do.
Boring's not a bad thing, especially if it's executed well. Speaking of which, my watch, boring, but wearing the Tudor Heritage 41. I haven't worn this for a while, and I'm just in love with this watch. It's a great watch. It will be a permanent part of my collection.
Cool.
Great.
And we've got some good watches in the chat too, by the look of it.
Yeah, we do. I wish we could see them. Especially this ProMaster Fugu.
Cool watch, that.
Yeah. And
Especially
then
the blue one, I think, is the nicest for me. The black's quite nice, but the blue one's a really poppy one.
And we have a Father Lurbit in the group as well. From
which one do we have there?
James Blonde.
I don't even honestly wouldn't even know what that is, but I would love to see it.
But is it it depends, I guess. Is it an old school one, like as in one of the more originals, or is it one of the kind of re-editions that have come back as the company's been brought back? Not that that's a bad thing by any stretch, but yeah, it's a cool wee brand, that.
Nice. So we were going to have some conversations. You guys who are watching can ask us anything about watches, but we had an interesting topic to kick things off. Dave had mentioned a topic that the Seagull movement is getting squeezed down as far as availability, and how that may impact micro brands from going on, or modern brands. What do you think?
So this was a video put out by Mark from Long Island Watches on YouTube 2 days ago. And he said that, and he's a customer for the ST19 for his Islander chronographs. So he said that Seagull had put out a statement saying that the minimum order quantity, so if you want to buy the movement, the minimum number you can buy is 10,000. So depending on which version of that movement you use, you're looking at between $600,000 and $900,000. And if that wasn't bad enough, there's another catch. You're not allowed to resell them. So they don't want distributors buying them and selling them on to other watch brands. So my thought was, and Mark was just going, this is going to make a lot of micro brands not be able to use the movement. Any brand that wants to use them, and I quote what Mark said, is going to have to put their big boy pants on, because you've got to figure out, can you afford a minimum of $600,000? Then you've got to make the watches and guarantee you're selling 10,000. That's taking that movement out of the micro brand market. And, my first thought was, well, that'll impact our favorite chronograph from Studio Underdog, surely.
Yeah.
Not now, it won't.
Oh, he's got enough volume.
If he was just starting, it would be a completely different conversation, but he's managed, he's been quite transparent about how many watches he sells. So I would think that it'll be punchy, to be fair, but I think he'll be in and about the ability now to probably make decisions that if he wants to continue with that movement, he can. That said, huge numbers of micro brands don't produce anything like that number. And if you're also new to the market and just getting into the market, then you've got a big problem. It doesn't come as a huge surprise to me, to be honest with you. I think Seagull have got something up their sleeve. I'm pretty convinced of it, which is relaunching their own brand. And it's a way of them controlling price, and it's a way of them getting back into the market and having the ability to command what price they decide they want to price, so that they've not got 20, 30, 40, 50 other micro brands with pricing all over the place, from ultra cheap to relatively premium for the micro brand sector. I think there's more going on than meets the eye there. And also, to be honest, dealing OEM with very small volume brands, as much as it's cool, it's a nightmare for movement manufacturers. Oh, can I buy 100 or 50 or 25 or 300, whatever? It's not particularly practical for them. Got to bear in mind that, these movement manufacturers produce millions of movements a year, not tens of thousands, not even hundreds of thousands, literally millions. Dealing with tiny, small volumes is a nightmare. And how many of these micro brands are challenging, shall we say, in many respects. Like we've seen brands come and go. We've seen brands take money, not deliver watches. It's not any different for the movement suppliers when they get stiffed over by some of these micro brands, which unfortunately does happen.
And, it's not uncommon for a large business to want to sell to small customers. Business I work for, we work through distribution, of course, because we can't afford to serve small customers. So I can understand that part of where Seagull are coming from. And it would be interesting if they are, it's going to help reduce some of their costs, because small customers are very demanding and expensive to serve. And if they are, as you say, looking to relaunch their own brand in a big way, I can fully understand it.
Yeah, I think the kind of trading part of it is slightly more interesting in that, you know, to be honest, if you want to buy movements from Sellita, unless you've got a punchy volume, you ain't buying them from Sellita either. Sellita do not supply directly to small volume clients either. Most of that's dealt with through, you know, intermediaries or trading companies who buy the volume from Sellita and then sell that on at a marked up premium to small volume customers. Because Sellita, again, they're not interested, although they don't control the reselling market, but they do control how much they sell them to those traders, so it keeps the price relatively high in real terms. Seagull, that's what makes me think they're up to something from a point of view of potentially relaunching the brand itself, or maybe they're just wanting to scale back in overall volume because it's just, you know, make less and sell them for more. You know, work smart, not hard. That could also be part of it as well. Be interesting to see where it goes. Whether, of course, all of this is actually true or not, because nobody's actually got anything definitive to say that this is the case.
I think Mark had Mark, as I say, and all this came from Mark from Long Island Watches on his YouTube channel, but he showed a document, but it's, of course, you know, hard to say one way or the other, but I think his interest was because he actually uses the movements himself, and I bet you he doesn't use 10,000.
No, he won't. There'll be very few micro brands that we know them in the Western world that are doing anything like that. Bear in mind as well, though, the Chinese market and also the Indian market is absolutely massive, and they sell hundreds of thousands of watches into a population of billions quite easily. So it's very different from that point of view. So we don't see most of that market, but I last year was over in China and we visited one of their top-end movement manufacturers that actually makes Chinese tourbillons. Not what people might scoff and go, oh, you know, Chinese tourbillon. But believe me, these guys weren't messing around. The factories were full of Swiss machinery that they bought up during the quartz crisis, and they told us they make about 1.2 to 1.5 million tourbillon movements a year, and they are all sold.
Really?
So there is a huge market. Yeah, there's a absolutely colossal market in those geographies that we just don't really see any of. Most of the brands as well, we've never heard of them.
Yeah, and we underestimate, as you say, the size of the Chinese market and the Indian market. It's a total black hole for watch fans in the West. I know on my trips to China, I've always been very interested in the watches my colleagues are wearing, because a lot more people are wearing mechanical watches in Asia than are in the West now.
Yeah, and you'll also see that. Well, we probably won't see it, but those markets will explode as well. You know, the Chinese market has imploded as far as Swiss, especially Swiss watches being exported into China, because the Chinese government have decided to get strict on where money goes and how money's used, and suddenly you're seeing a huge uprising of what you could class as pretty good quality Chinese domestic brands who are quite happy to step in and take that market away where it's available to them, and it's definitely happening.
And the Chinese brands, of course, can have retail stores in China much more, much more easily. It's their own backyard, to pardon the phrase.
We've opened a whole hornet's nest of topic on this Sellita movement, and I'm going to come back to that. But Dave, you mentioned something that I found interesting, because what you were saying about Sellita was sort of news to me, because I always sort of saw Sellita as the guy who was being the gap filler when Swatch did this with the ETA movement, where they locked it down and they limited distribution of the ETA movement. And you go like, well, Sellita now is the savior, and we're still getting a high quality Swiss movement. But what I'm understanding is you're saying like they're kind of locking it down now too, which was kind of news to me.
It's been like that for quite a long time. In terms of if you rock up at Sellita and say, "Can I buy 100 movements for you?" They'll just they won't. In fact, you wouldn't even get that far. Put it that way, you wouldn't even get a meeting with them. Most of the low volume users of Sellita movements are buying it on effectively the resale or the grey market for all intents and purposes. Whether Sellita proactively support that, I don't really think they do. They just turn a bit of a blind eye to it. If someone comes along and says, can I order 100,000, 200,000 movements from you? They will sell to them. There is quite a few traders of it who buy those things and then put them out into the market for the people who want to buy a few hundred, a few thousand movements at a time, because you know, you get 20 or 30 customers doing that. You can suddenly hit the MOQs, but they do it for the same reason. Dealing with small volume customers is, generally speaking, a nightmare. Sellita might do it in exceptional circumstances, usually because a brand might have a super high profile. You know, someone, a micro brand who's hit the limelight. Let's say, for example, someone like Studio Underdog, where there's a huge amount of good publicity around it, maybe not able to meet the MOQs that would normally be there, but there's maybe a potential upside for both brands to get involved that way. But your average Joe who just says, I'm going to create a brand, can I buy 250 movements, will not even get the time of day from them.
Okay, so they're going to a third party and paying a slight upcharge to the third party per movement, as opposed to getting the regular price right off from the manufacturer.
Correct.
And Sellita have evolved as a manufacturer really very quickly in the last 20 years. If you look at they had a YouTube video talking to their technical director. I forget who it was, but they are not just an assembler of ebauché anymore. They have the ability to make from scratch. They have their own advanced, I think they call it AMT, their own sort of custom movement division which sells movements. So Sellita are not just an ETA clone maker anymore. They are a very sophisticated, very large scale manufacturer.
Interesting.
Correct.
All right, we're gonna go back, and this one I think I already know the answer, but I found this. We'll just answer this one quickly because I feel bad for this guy. But dropped my Seagull this evening, and it keeps stopping. Any tips on how to fix? Unfortunately,
don't drop it. sorry.
No, you're
maybe harsh.
You're right. Unfortunately, it's one of those movements that it would cost probably $1,000 to service it. You're gonna have to just get a new one.
Yeah.
Or if you know of a watchmaker, a local watchmaker, to be honest, there's lots of decent local watchmakers about that aren't sitting in some kind of high profile, super posh AD somewhere or in a service center for one of the big brands that, you know, local to me, you know, as a guy, and Martin's a Glasgow, small little guy, been there for forever, has worked for big brands in the past, and has a repair shop. And usually if you go in and talk to these people, they'll have a look at it. It will still probably cost you anything from $100, $200 to get someone to look at it and potentially repair it. So you have to weigh up, is the watch actually worth that? But, you know, you can fix these things. Seagull is a pretty fixable movement, to be honest.
And, you know, other than that don't be surprised if it's cheaper to actually replace the movement.
Yeah.
Particularly with the ST19, with it being a column wheel chronograph. It's
absolutely.
And being developed in the 1930s. So it's a movement that wants to fall apart anyway.
Well, as Dave has said numerous times, the chronograph is the most complicated movement in a watch.
Horrible.
And so to repair, if there's something broken in there, this is going to be a challenge for you. I'm sorry to tell you.
But the moral of the story is don't drop the watch.
Don't drop your watch.
It's a disaster.
Watch Addict had a good question. Surely there must be some other Chinese movement manufacturer that can make affordable chrono movements. IP protections aren't really that strong in China, are they?
No, not in China.
Robert Wood replied, I think Peacock makes an affordable chrono movement. I'm not sure how they compare to Seagull. And
there's a lot of Chinese movement manufacturers, a lot of them. And, you know, Seagull aren't, I would say they're middle of the range in regards to where most of the Chinese movement manufacturers are. There's definitely some real low-end junk that's out there. Seagull make a reasonable, considering how many they make, they're reasonably good, you know. If they weren't, to be honest, you know, folk like we've used them again, but Studio Underdog, he sold a huge number of chronograph watches, and the internet's not awash with people saying, oh, this is junk, my watch doesn't work, oh, I've sent them back, it's broken as soon as I've got it. You know, there's thousands and thousands of people who have them, wear them and enjoy them. So, you know, again, like most movement manufacturers with Seagull movements, there's different grades and different qualities as well.
Yeah, and I, you get nervous. Like I love Sega design, and I think Dave, you guys have talked about Sega design before as well, and they're doing what I can't tell what the movement is. I have one of those ones that kind of looks like a Richard Mille, handsome watch, runs well, but I don't know how delicate it is. I'd be very scared if I dropped it. I'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Much like that Seagull Movement, but there's a lot coming out of it. I also bought a AliExpress, but it's a jump hour that is not a copy of any other watch, and it's fascinating. That's another one. I'm like, I treat it like it's China. Very careful. I don't want to drop it. I don't want to overwind it. I don't want to do anything. That's an interesting, cool piece. I have no idea what's going on with that movement.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. James just added, I ordered a San Martin Chrono for less than $200. Yeah, you probably did. It's probably a Seagull Movement, and don't drop it.
And to commit a heresy, the best looking Omega Speedmaster is the Pagani design Project Alaska.
I own that one.
Yeah.
I love that watch. It's great looking.
And Dave, don't complain because I own more than my fair share of Omega Speedmasters too.
It's a great looking watch, and it's
a great one. Dave's got the original, haven't you, Dave? It's a beautiful watch. That. Yeah.
Well, the difference is the one that Pagani made. It's not really like the Alaska Project. It's really like a traditional moon watch, like a Speedmaster moon watch, with the Alaska Project subdial, the hands.
Yeah,
that's
the
hand. Only.
That's
yeah.
not. Yeah.
Or you can buy Moonswatch Mission to Mars if you want.
It's like the Moonswatch Mission to Mars more than it is the Alaska Project, because the Alaska Project is a beast of a watch.
Well, I mean, the original is effectively just a standard Speedmaster. It depends whether you want to put that hulking great aluminium can on it, but that's a different matter.
And you have that whole hulking aluminium can, don't you?
Correct. Well, correct. And did you get the spelling right this time as well?
He did. I was error checking that one, waiting to jump in.
I'm trying to get my proper English correct with you guys, but sometimes Excellent. I get off a little bit.
Well, you mean you're doing better than Sam, so
he has no excuses. Literally, no. Well, actually, he's from Yorkshire, so he does. To be fair, he's from the Midlands or Yorkshire, yeah, so he's got no excuse.
He's from Manchester, I think.
Oh, Jesus, that's worse.
Yep.
So would that be sort of like a British hillbilly?
No, it would be worse.
There's a good question by Watch Addict. Speaking of movements, I have a question on my mind. Where's the Omega Spirate system disappeared to? The greatest innovation in technology since the spring drive, but seen nowhere. I mean, Mark, you've spoken about this before. I mean, haven't you? And
I think both Mark and Dave, I and Dave have spoken about it. Actually, I suspect the greatest innovation in movement making recently was Horage with their micro adjust.
Yeah, micro adjust. Yeah,
but I'll let Dave talk to Spirate.
Spirate's a cool system, but Omega have masterfully done what they are actually very good at. Actually, I'll be fair to Omega. Compared to many brands, they actually have a pretty decent technological innovation department, and they do bring new materials and new ideas to market, which an awful lot of brands actually don't. They market that they've got new ideas, but they're not new. Omega are pretty good that way. But Spirate is a system that was pushed as, you need this in your life. The only thing that it actually makes easier is the life of the watchmaker, because it allows the watchmaker to make much more delicate, measured adjustments to the regulation system of the watch compared to what you could do with the old setup. The problem is it's a monstrously expensive way of doing it, to the point where it's made the watch with Spirate versus effectively the same watch without it not minimally more expensive, but I think verging on double the price. Not quite double, but not that far away. And it has really got very little positive benefit for the end user. That would be my take on it. It's not any more or any less accurate than most of the Meta certified stuff that Omega are pushing out anyway. And still, if you need it to be adjusted, you have to trot off to Omega themselves to get them to adjust it. In fact, even worse, it has to go back to Switzerland because currently it's something that most of the Omega technicians aren't allowed to touch because it's so new and no one knows what they're doing with it.
Yeah.
Therefore, it ends up being arguably longer to get it done than it would be with the more normal system. It's a cool innovation. It's a nice idea, but not executed particularly well, in my opinion, and that it costs disproportionately more than it should for the benefits it brings.
Tell me about it.
And it's not a small watch.
Yep, tell
Yeah.
me about it.
I'm going to quickly answer Robert Wood here. Yes, I have that Pierre Paulin. I bought the salmon dial, and it is an interesting watch, and I love to wear it. Very comfortable. But again, I have no idea the source of that movement inside, so I treat it very delicately.
Bear in mind as well, you know, like lots of folk they'll make comment and say, "Oh, you know, this watch is cool. It came from China or wherever. I'm not sure of the kind of provenance of the movement, or if something goes wrong, what happens." To be honest, if you get your hands on anything vintage from Switzerland, or you get something from some obscure Swiss manufacturer, it's not actually that much different. You know, like there's a big argument for industrially produced movements that are easy to service because you know that if you bump it, knock it, do something stupid like drop your watch, it's a relatively easy fix and a usually relatively inexpensive fix. If you've got something fancy, it's going to be expensive and a bit nightmarish, especially if that brand doesn't exist anymore. So it's not really that different. It's just because, especially China, language barriers and things like that always make things slightly more difficult. There's not quite as much transparency, although Switzerland and transparency don't necessarily go hand in hand either, to be fair.
Well, and you and Ricky have made the argument for some time that just because it's China doesn't mean it's poorly made. Most of our most advanced devices that we use every day of the week are manufactured in China. So
yeah,
the China, you know, I'm old enough to remember the days, you know, it was, you know, when it said made in Japan, folks scoffed, "Oh, it's Japanese, it'll be junk, it'll be rubbish." And then not that long after, you know, like especially with audio and things like that, Japan became, if you want the best audio in the world, other than ultra high-end hand-built stuff, you'd make sure it's Japanese. Then, of course, everyone scoffed, "Oh, it's Korean." You know, you only need to think of all the Korean car brands and Samsung and LG. Everyone used to laugh. What was it LG stood for? Lucky Good. And suddenly, you know, some of the most advanced electronics in the world come out of Korea. China's not any different, you know, like everyone in the Western world's used them for high-end manufacturing for 20 plus years now. These guys aren't stupid, you know, they cotton on real fast and you can get some amazing things. If you buy right from China and you do your homework, you can get some actually amazing quality kit right across the spectrum, not just watches.
And just think how much of the Swiss watch supply chain uses components from China and just doesn't tell anybody.
Well, it's an interesting story. I'll not name names. One of the highest end case factories in the world, not most, a huge number of brands, whether they be Swiss, German, whatever, the raw cases come from China, sometimes Taiwan, quite often China. Sometimes they're finished when they get to Switzerland in terms of finishing and a couple of little bits and bobs, but the castings quite often, or the billet stuff, is out of China. And one of the most premium outlets in the world was in China, that all of the big names used it. And guess who basically put pay to that? Apple came along when the Apple Watch came out, and they were so fastidious about tolerances and the case being absolutely perfect that they went to these guys and said, "Partly you make good watch cases, we need you to make this." The guy said it was a nightmare getting it right, but he got it right, and he now does nothing but Apple Watch cases, because that suddenly put out of play the best case maker, arguably one of the best case makers in the world in terms of volume and quality. Yeah, because Apple came along and said, and he said, Apple make the Swiss watch industry, the whole global watch industry, mechanical watch industry, look backwards when it comes to tolerances.
I mean, if you have an Apple Watch or ever held one, they are beautifully manufactured. It's a boring watch, but it is a beautifully put together piece of equipment. And
Exactly.
to that end, also, there's been a couple comments about the Chinese tourbillon movements that are coming out. I haven't had my hand on one, but Dave, Mark, Tom, anything?
Yep, I've as I mentioned, I visited last year the factory that basically produced well over 1 million Chinese tourbillons, and you'll barely ever see any of these movements outside China, because we spoke to them and said, what is your market? And they said domestic Chinese market, simple as that. And these were COSC level certifiable, not COSC certified because they can't, but they were putting these onto high-end time graphers and checking them, and they were running super accurately, really nicely made, really good quality parts on it, and they were super proud of what they did. And yeah, it was eye-opening to see what these guys can do. They're behind on a couple of things. Silicon technology in watches, they've not got there, they've not mastered that, but then they have mastered microprocessors down to, I think, 5 nanometers now, so they're not that far away. If they really wanted to do it, they could do it.
It's a slightly different technology, but it's a path you have to want to follow.
Yeah, exactly. But when it comes to lithography, if you can do 5 nanometer microprocessors, if you want to put your mind to it, you can do silicon components for watches.
Mark,
quick one here. Yeah, Bella. Yep, you haven't been here in a couple of months. You got to keep up, because we're constantly changing around here. So good to see you.
The best beard in Watch YouTube has returned.
I don't know whether we covered this in last week's topic about Dinky, but T. Lukesty right at the top of the chat has got a question about grey market websites, WatchMax, Joma Shop. He says, when would you buy from them as opposed to an AD? A certain discount threshold, or does it depend on the brand?
I think for me that's a pretty personal choice you need to make. You need to decide, do your research. If the site has got enough good feedback to it, I think Joma Shop has a reasonably good kind of reputation. I'm sure there's a few horror stories, but then there's horror stories about ADs as well. Depends where your narrative is. If you value the deal more than the potential service and extras that come with it with an AD, then these places can offer pretty solid value if you want to. If you want the latest cutting edge model, usually these places aren't the place to go, because they usually won't have those hard to get pieces, but they've got their place, and I think if folk are happy to use it, as long as you do your homework, it's good. Just make sure you check certain things out. Quite often manufacturers' warranties are not quite honoured. There's sometimes a separate warranty that these people offer themselves, but yeah, I mean, I personally don't use them for new watches. That's just my personal choice. But then there's plenty of people out there that might like the idea of owning a watch at, 10 grand, haven't got the means to get 10 grand, but can maybe see something pretty close from the brand they want at 5 or 6 grand, and they can afford that. And if that gets them into watches, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. I've never used a grey market, but I have been looking at a Young'uns solar watch that is really hard to get your hands on in the US, and it's I think it's an outgoing model, but at 30% off, and I don't mind having the Joma Shop warranty for a watch in that class. I'm not sure I'd want to buy an Omega or a proper brand watch from there. But again, it's as Dave says, it's a personal choice.
Yeah. We've got one directed at you, Dave, from Mark IKN. Question for David. We know your agenda is packed for Geneva Watch Days, but which meetings are you most looking forward to?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess I'm not going to say there's anything specific. There's a couple of brands that I always enjoy going to visit because I like the people involved. They're always good fun. So, going to see the guys at Moser, catching up with Edward, and the guys is always good fun because it's just low key, good laugh, and these people are, folk that are regarded as friends now. So it's always good to see what they're up to. Quite looking forward to seeing Grubel Forze, because they do stupid, crazy watches that are completely out with the realms of reality for most people, including myself. But they are not. They're not hoity-toity like some brands are, which are very dismissive. Oh yeah, you're not in our category. They love showing their products off. They understand that most folk can't afford them, but they love showing them off for what they are. So it's always good seeing Grubel Forze. And there's always a few surprises. There's more and more brands go to that show now. Lots of the little brands, micro brands, into the kind of small independent brands now that always go along and do some cool stuff, and you always get caught a little bit by surprise when you see something you're not really expecting to see. So it's a really nice low-key show. It's busy, but it's not as formal as most of the shows are, so it's pretty laid back, easy going. So yeah, it's good to just catch up with a lot of folk who are a little bit more chilled out than they would be at, say, somewhere like Watches and Wonders.
And it's another showing show. It's not a selling show, is it?
To be honest, most of them are selling the brand more than a specific product.
Yeah.
There's a few brands launch things, but more often than not, it's a reprise of what they've done over the last, say, 9 months, and they might give you a little sneak peek about what might be coming, but it's not kind of like Watches and Wonders where it's these are the big set piece watches that we're launching for this year. They're much more about as I say, the brand, and it's a whole mix. You've got media, you've got customers, you've got just fans of watches who can wander into MB&F or Moser or Grubel Forze or Laurent Ferrier, any of these brands, and they can walk in and say hello to someone and have a coffee and pick some watches up and have a chat to them and dream, because I'm not any different to the vast majority of people, as there's a multitude of watches that I would love to have, and I'm never going to either be able to afford them or be able to justify paying the money for them. But it's always nice to try them on, and it kind of keeps the fire alive a wee bit.
Yeah, you're going to see a lot of independents at Geneva Watch Days, I guess, aren't you? Now, one question I had was with the buyout of MB&F, not total buyout, but the 25% buyout by Chanel of would you still consider MB&F an independent?
Well, yes, because, I guess it depends how you class independent. If you class it in the true sense of it's owned by one person, then no. But then, to be honest, there's very few brands, even the ones that we all know as independents, that are independent, completely, truly independent in ownership. Yeah. I mean, I guess they still are. What's Chanel's taking a 25% stake? 25%, Chanel's not part of one of the big conglomerates. It's owned by one particularly wealthy individual. I think last time I looked, he's nearing 42 billion net worth. So he's definitely not in the poorer end of the money market. But he owns the Chanel empire. So they're independent. MB&F is a kind of co-ownership between Max and his partner. So there's now 3 of them that own it. I think for me, if the narrative of the brand in terms of how they operate, what they produce, and how they do it is more about what makes them independent. MB&F aren't sitting under a board or a hierarchy of Richemont or LVMH being told, well, I know you want to do that crazy movement with Steve McDonald, but what we need you to do is just take the same movement that everyone else in the group's using and change a couple of things and put your name in it. So, if you look at Richemont, are any of them independent? No. The amount of crossover of technologies and materials and movements and blah 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 between all the watch brands within the Richemont brand or LVMH makes them not independent to me. It's a conglomerate or a group, same as Swatch Group. Powermatic 80 movement, how many brands use it? They all call it something slightly different. It's the same movement at the end of the day. I think that's what makes someone, let's say, MB&F independent. They do something that nobody else would do, probably because it's completely stupid, but it makes the world quite fun and interesting. But it's not something you would necessarily do out of sense.
And
so
Chanel, and Chanel have stakes in quite a few independent brands, and you
And
don't
also,
hear anybody complaining.
Well, also Kinesi as well,
Yeah.
and they're not exactly independent, but they've got a fair stake in there. They're, I think, doing something sensible for them. They're keeping their finger lightly in, but enough in to be serious about it, in quite a selection of brands that do some quite innovative left field things, and it's very artisanal, and it ultimately makes them stronger because they will have not necessarily access to MB&F technology, but access to the skills that MB&F have within MB&F that nobody else has, and that they'll learn things from that. So I think it keeps Chanel on their toes.
Yeah, so as long as they're designing in-house and doing their own designs and being innovative still, they're basically a good independent platform. Yeah.
I would say that they are definitely still independent. I mean, who knows where that goes in the future, but I think whilst Max is basically in the business, proactively working, actively involved in all the decisions, I don't think he'll let it change because it's his baby. Who knows where that goes in the future.
And that was part of his statement, wasn't it? This is, in a sense, he's saying, I'm in my late 40s, early 50s. This is the first step in planning for the future.
Yeah, I mean, succession, isn't it? At the end of the day, he's thinking, I've spent the better part of my adult life building this from for all intents and purposes, nothing. MB&F shouldn't exist, and it shouldn't have survived, and it shouldn't really have got to where it is. People forget, yes, their watches are monstrously expensive, but they produce tiny numbers of watches, and frankly, their R&D cost to make tiny numbers of crazy watches is, these are not the most profitable things in the world. Sure, they're profitable, don't get me wrong, but they ain't operating on the same level as Swatch Group or LVMH or Richemont by any stretch of the imagination.
In the statement, they said that they had increased production from 280 watches to 420 over a period of years. So they are not, as Dave says, they are not they're not churning out a million a week.
And I think with something like 30 or 40 staff members who are Swiss, highly qualified, who will be earning particularly good money, none of what they make is cheap to make. The bill of materials for some of these watches will be monstrous in its own right. Yes, there'll be profit in it, but they're not a business that I would say, if you look at it on paper, you're going, oh my God, look at the outrageous margins they're making. They're not.
I have an interesting comment here, and it's a brand that I don't hear much about. Someone wants to know thoughts on Panzera. Had a few of them. It's really good.
No, not a brand I'm familiar with. I know they're quite a low-end brand.
I had one for a while. I really enjoyed it. I kind of regret selling it. It's very much, the one I had looked a lot like a Panerai. It's a little weird that it looks a lot like a Panerai, and it's called Panzera, which always made me a little dodgy. It felt worse than Pagani design, but it's a nice watch. It's decent. I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts?
I don't know the brand particularly, but there's lots and lots of brands out there that fall into that. I don't know. Let's call it homage category. Let's call it that for the sake of trying to pigeonhole it. But not necessarily brands that aren't design driven in terms of they're usually taking quite a lot of prompting from what's out there. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing though. It's like you could argue it allows people access to things that they might not otherwise get access to. How unique is any watch? MB&F, we've talked about them. Fair, pretty unique. Probably do things that have never been seen before. Our work, same category. But even Moser, that's seen as being, quite a high-end independent. Streamliner's a little bit left of centre, but most of what they produce is not exactly groundbreaking when it comes to innovative new shapes or designs or anything like that. So how is it really any different from someone, let's say Moser, coming along and producing a watch that doesn't look that different to something that was made 30, 40 years ago? It's just because it's very expensive in Swiss and they're pretty good at marketing, validates it. Whereas when it's a small business doing it, people react differently to it. It's a difficult one.
There's
No,
only
you're
so many
right.
ways
And
to design a
I,
drive watch.
I don't think a Panerai is ever in my pocketbook. Let's put it that way. But the Panzera was a very nice watch to wear in lieu of that, and decent water resistance. I felt like, oh yeah, this is like this does it. This fits all the bill for me.
Yeah, there's some really cool brands of that ilk that take a lot of design license from other stuff that's out there, but I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Well, so it goes as a question.
Yeah, I was going to say this is going to be a question for you smart guys. So the decline of the Chinese domestic market for Swiss watches, will we see a further consolidation of Swiss brands? I think we're going to see that because of smartwatches, not necessarily Chinese. But.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because there was a financial report last couple of days, back into last week, that Apple are the most valuable watch brand in the world in terms of capital realization of the amount of money that they bring in from the sale of watches. Rolex are about that far away now from it, like literally touching it. They're past the baton reach. So potentially Rolex actually might surpass them. So I think smartwatch has done this, and it's big. Don't get me wrong, it's huge, but it's not a growing market anymore. It's probably towards the top end of where it's at, and it'll stay way above most Swiss watch brands by a country mile. But at the same time, the Chinese market's a big problem for Switzerland. It's a huge problem for them, because there's a lot of brands overly relied on China, and they made one, I wouldn't say fatal mistake, but they miscalculated. China has done an amazing job of opening up and being a consumer society, but it's still a strictly authoritarian regime. And the brands, a lot of them, and it's not just watches, luxury handbags, designer clothes, all of that, they all forgot that if the government one day wake up and go, actually, do you know what, we don't like this is what's happening, that's what happens. It's not like the Western world where the governments don't have the ability to do that. The Chinese government have decided they've had enough of that, and they've changed their tact, and they've started clamping down on it. And almost overnight, that market in many respects has dried up for brands. I know one brand in Switzerland, long established, independent brand, been over 100 years in existence, and is now in dire straits because 70% of their market for the last 25, 30 years has been China. And it's almost dried up within months. And they've got a big problem, to the point where they're laying off watchmakers. You all remember we talked about coming out of COVID, not enough watchmakers, not enough capacity, not enough people making components, big delays in watches. That's entirely flipped on its head now. There's an excess of watchmakers. Most of the companies making components, you can get stuff on short lead time now as well, and it's mostly been driven by China. So that's where you'll see Chinese brands really come up in the Chinese domestic market, and the Swiss will pay a painful price for it. Will there be consolidation? There's not a huge amount more consolidating can be done, to be honest with you, because there's pretty much 3 major houses own pretty much all of the brands in real terms. I think what you'll see is maybe some of the big groups might shutter some of the brands. That's what might happen.
I think there's also...
My big concern is sort of like what happened in the camera market. I make my living with cameras, and the point and shoot market has been decimated by the cell phone. And I kind of see the sub $500 watch market being destroyed by smartwatches, in that there may be only watches that are expensive that will be available, or really cheap, like a $29 G-Shock or something like that. But that mid-market could be in real trouble, I think. But I don't know. What are your thoughts?
It already is in trouble.
If you have a look, how many watches realistically are there in the... And by market, I'm talking about high street not geeky delving into the internet and finding stuff. I'm talking about walk down the high street, look in jewelers' windows. Yep, you get your $25, $30, $50, $100 watch, your Swatch watches, your G-Shocks, your Timexes, all of these kind of things. Then you get a couple of things like your entry-level Seikos and your couple of $100, 200, 250, maybe 300. Then there's not a whole lot until you move into the 700, 800. There's stuff, there is stuff, but there's not a lot, because that market is the market where it's entry-level Apple Watch, mid-range Apple Watch, premium Apple Watch, your Samsung Galaxy Watch, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
That they own that sphere, entirely own that sphere. Because let's be honest again, the average person doesn't own more than one watch. And most folk, if they buy an Apple Watch, then that's their watch. We can sit here and get all in our high horses about, well, it's not really a watch, is it? Because it's a blah, 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 blah. Average Joe on the street, it goes on your wrist and it tells the time. It's a watch.
It's a watch.
So exactly.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, it's right.
When you try and argue with them, they just look like you're a lunatic. Did you get let out for the day? When do you check back in? So as I say, I think
you're a watch zealot.
I would also say that
market's already gone.
There's another potential risk is the US market. So yes, you've had huge sales to China. Now they've suddenly realized that the US market is the next biggest market. So what are they going to do? Stuff product in the channel, throw watches to America, or put prices up to get some of that profit back that they're not getting in China. And I suspect they'll do the latter first. So the US market could see they've got choices, but how do they get that money back? And if you're a publicly owned company, you're going to need to figure out how to get that 20% volume or turnover back.
Yeah,
Here's
I think.
For you.
Yeah. Oh, they were.
Yes.
Yeah. Long live the king. The king is dead. Longines pivoted though. They began to realize they've been stung more than once with that. And I mean, so was, if you look at Tudor, as in the modern Tudor, for quite a long time, there was a huge volume of Tudor product that you never saw it in Europe. You never saw it in the US. It was aimed just entirely at the Chinese market. And those brands have kind of pulled back from that as well. Longines have... my pitch is Longines are the new Omega. And I'm sticking with that story, because if you think Omega up till 4 or 5 years ago sat in that price point of 3,500, 4,000 to 6,000, 7,000. That was their that was their stomping ground. And they made a conscious effort they wanted to up their game, they wanted to push the market up, they wanted to kind of get into the Rolex territory basically. And price-wise, certainly, that's pretty much where they are at. You're now talking more like 5-6 entry point. They've got a huge number of products that are in and about just under 10, just over 10 grand. Huge volume of products in that price category, and that's super premium. That's way out the reach of 85% of the population, even of the UK or the US. And Longines have come in now. They've got lots of really cool watches at the 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 5 grand, even 5.5 to 6 now in some of their most premium pieces. I think they're setting themselves up to be that new mass volume. It's Swatch Group's answer to Tudor and Tag. Well, Tag's upped its game as well. Breitling, it's competing with those now. People, I think, there's a lot of people still like, oh no, Longines is a bit lower end. I don't think it is anymore. Go and have a look at the prices, because they're not what they were 10 years ago.
And look at the watches too. The changes they've made to the design and the perceived quality of Longines. Okay, I'm not a fan of their design, but you can see they've put the effort in. They've pitched themselves around, I would say, around Tudor right now. But all the work, all the launches they've done in the last 2 or 3 years, you can see this was a strategy that they must have kicked in 4 or 5 years ago to see the results we're seeing now.
And they've got some genuine,
and they've got some great watches,
stuff. They do.
Dave mentioned something. I'll be very curious. I'm really curious to see what TAG has up their sleeve, what LVMH has up their sleeve for next year with the
TAG.
F1. With the F1, like, are
TAG,
they going to
TAG's
just blow up?
TAG is pushing hard for they're pushing for Tudor market. They want to own that $2.5 to $5 market. That's what they want. They want it bad because currently they're more in the sub $2 to $3.5 category, and they want to move up a couple of grand at bottom and at top. And Formula One could be the vehicle for them because, you know, Formula One's now people forget Formula One's a rich sport, but 10 years ago it was worthless. You know, the reason that, you know, people go, oh, how the hell did Rolex get 50 million for the full year? Because it didn't have huge television rights like it has nowadays. In the US 10 years ago, if you said Formula One, they kind of went, well, we've got real motorsport here. And look at it now, you know, Formula One's one of the fastest growing watch motorsports in the US. Was it now 2 or 3 events now in the US?
3.
You know?
Yeah.
And,
3.
you know, so Formula One's just breaking into one of the biggest television audience markets for sport on the planet. And, you know, TAG will piggyback onto that. And I think it'll take TAG from being so, you know, to actually quite a wanted product.
And if you were watching today's race and you saw the man who happily came second, he had a TAG Monaco on his wrist. Did Max Verstappen? You know, so
I can't remember. There's some US NFL, I don't know, whatever, some NFL player, I think it is. I think he's one of the richest. I can't even remember his name, but one of the big guys in that sport. I've seen it recently, folks saying, oh, what watch is he? Well, and it turns out he was wearing a TAG Formula One.
Yeah.
You know, and folk kind of going, oh, well, you know, his money can he not afford to have? Of course he can afford to have whatever he wants, but it's interesting.
He can afford to wear what he likes as well.
Exactly. And that's interesting that he's chosen a TAG, you know? So, you know, I think that brand it'll go up. But it's interesting. I think you'll see Zenith kind of get eclipsed because Zenith was kind of becoming the cool brand and it kind of went, and I think TAG is the one brand that they've got that has got real volume capacity if they really want to make it work.
And room to grow in terms of pricing as well.
Yeah,
exactly. You know, what's their dive watch? But I saw their new dive watches. I saw them recently, and those are very, very nice watches.
Yeah, you look at the glass box and stuff like that. You know, they're really nicely made watches these days. I don't know what it is for me. It's a brand that's never really resonated with me for some reason. I don't know why. I quite like the Monaco, but it's just a brand that's never made me go, oh, that's cool. I want one of those. But they make a really nice quality watch, and their quality has got infinitely better for value proposition these days. They're pretty bloody good.
I mean, I desperately wanted a TAG Formula One when I was younger. Not so much now, but yeah, they've always been an aspirational watch, I think.
Yeah.
When I was younger,
in their 20s, teens, 20s.
When I was younger, it was TAG and Rolex. Those were the rich guy watches too.
Yep.
That's who you thought of. Yeah.
To Watch Addict, TAG are sponsoring Red Bull. So if you saw the Grand Prix today, you would have seen a TAG Monaco on Max Verstappen's wrist when he was doing his post-race interview. Clear as day.
Yeah, and Rolex doesn't sponsor teams; they just sponsor they're branding the whole darn event. Their badges everywhere.
That's very typical of Rolex. Yes, they've got some ambassadors, but they don't, like most brands shout loud about, oh, X is wearing my watch. Rolex have never been as crass, as they would put it, as that. You know, they tend to plaster an event. So if it's Wimbledon or Formula One or whatever it is, it's the green sign, the Rolex and the crown everywhere. They tend to go with the full kind of nuclear option when it comes to sponsorship. Just put your name everywhere.
Rolex sponsorship is so obvious, it's almost subliminal.
They let Tudor be the crass ones while they sponsor the Red Bull Visa Cash App team.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You look, I've always said this: Rolex, the brand Rolex is worth more than everything else. It's the most valuable asset they've got is the name. You know, the luxury part of Rolex is the Rolex name. They make a beautiful product. I will still argue all day long, it's far and away not the luxury. Okay, let me preface that with all mechanical watches more than £1,000 are luxury products because nobody needs them. But in the grand scheme of luxury, I always say Rolex is a premium product made by a luxury company because you know, they're like Audi. Yeah, they mass produce huge volumes of something extremely well in big volume, very high standard. But it's not luxury. It's not luxurious in that there's no rarity. There's no real exclusiveness to it. There's much more luxurious watch brands, but the average person would go, you know, average person wouldn't know who MB&F are.
Yeah.
But I would say an MB&F make a luxury product. Everybody knows everybody knows what a Rolex is. Yeah. And they've managed to get the perception of the product is higher than the product actually is. That's not to say it's a bad product. It's a very good product. It's very well made, but it's not luxury in the true sense of luxury to me. You go and buy a Van Cleef apparel or something like that. That's luxury.
Yeah.
The Rolex is to me, it's kind of the wealth, the rich guy's Timex. Really, it's a very well made, very solid, very reliable, good quality watch.
Well, don't they call it the Texas Timex?
Yeah.
If you're in Houston and Dallas, it's the Texas Timex.
Yeah. I mean, it's a status symbol more than a luxury product. It says something about the person wearing it, or people wearing them like to think it says something about them. But it's a bit, you got to be careful with that one. It's a bit like Audi and BMW and Mercedes. People think, oh, I've made it. I've got this brand of car. Depends which one you've got and depends how you drive it as to how people will actually judge you.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, thank you, everybody, for...
Just interesting one from Watch Addict is saying about our favourite YouTube watch channels. He's been enjoying This Watch, That Watch. And I just wanted to say, Mike from This Watch, That Watch is my favourite YouTuber at the moment. I think his analysis of the market is absolutely brilliant. And my other favourite YouTubers are ID Guy and the weekly watch show from Scottish Watches, our friends down there. My favorite live streamers are I've been watching Watches with Dennis recently. I've discovered his channel. He does a Saturday morning live stream. He's in the chat at the moment. And of course the Casual Watch Reviews channel, and our friend Lucy on the Watchbox Diaries. Watchbox Diaries. She does a Wednesday live stream on Wednesday evening in the UK. It's a great women and watches, women talking watches. Absolutely great show. So they're my recommendations to Watch Addicts.
And just to round that one out, can we go with that famous phrase? Who's Nico?
Who's Nico?
best slap down of the week. That one.
Well, thank you, everybody, for being so active in the chat. It was a really enjoyable show. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you all for the comment, for the questions.
Be sure to upvote and share and do all those YouTube things so we can find more audience. Thanks again for watching. See you soon.
Have a good one, everybody.
Take care, everyone. See you next time.